The study of youth culture has become important to thinking about the connection between young people's lives, the ways they build identity, the way that they kind of form status groups, and also wider structural things like consumer culture that we've looked at elsewhere in the course. So youth culture has become a really vibrant thing to study. Youth culture just very broadly being the things that young people do in their day-to-day lives, kind of outside of the workplace and outside of education systems. So here there's all kinds of studies about the way that young people practice in day-to-day lives, whether it's going to the pub, going to gigs, playing sport, and it's also the consumption and practices of popular culture and art and things like that as well. There's been numerous ways of thinking about this, and the concepts kind of flow from one end, from the more Marxist concepts where young people are kind of cultural dupes, where the culture industry provides them with things like films and music and stuff like that to keep them sedated so they don't rebel in that kind of Marxist sense. More recently, there's been subcultural theories that point out that while the mainstream, the so-called mainstream, might behave like that in some ways, there's actually kind of pockets of people around the world that are practicing forms of youth culture that are actually quite subversive and rebellious, and these became known as subcultures. The foundational studies here in terms of youth culture were around punks and mods and rockers in the 60s and 70s in particular. Here the notion of punk is seen as a way of living your day-to-day life that resists against mainstream norms, but also it gives you some autonomy to live the way you want to live within those structures. It's not about complete revolution, it's about finding a way of life, of making do, of kind of getting on with your life, but still having some kind of artistic expression. So within these kind of realms, we see the use of everyday symbols as a way of rebelling. In this sense, the mohawk is not just a haircut, it was a way of kind of symbolically standing out and rebelling against the norms of society. The use of things like safety pins as earrings, the reuse of these everyday objects as a way of kind of expressing oneself. Punks started to wear garbage bags, for instance, when they thought they were being treated like garbage by the government as a symbolic form of resistance. So subcultures here use what's called bricolage, the use of everyday objects in a kind of different, subversive, resisting way. Other ways we can think about this is the way that skateboarders use things like public car parks to perform their skateboarding. Car parks here are kind of used for people to go to work or to go and to consume in supermarkets, where young people that are skateboarding in this sense reuse that public space for their own kind of endeavours and their own forms of self-expression. So the Birmingham School started to think about popular culture and youth culture, not as a site of kind of boring, lifeless consumption, but a form of struggle and a form of self-expression. Pop culture here becomes a kind of conversation between elites who want things to be a certain way and more younger kind of rebellious people that want things to be other ways. The resistance here is resistance through rituals, and the struggle is through symbols, as I kind of mentioned before with punk. Today we can still see subcultures out there in society, but there's been kind of developments of subculture theory where it's argued that there's not as many kind of people performing in these specific groups, that people kind of pick and choose and move between these things more freely, what's sometimes called neo-tribes and club cultures and lifestyles. So youth culture in this sense is a way of thinking about a socialising area for young people. It's things that they do outside of kind of the official structures of their day-to-day life, whether that's the family, the school or work. And youth cultures are a place where young people find other people like themselves, forming identity groups, moving out in terms of away from the family, in terms of influences and socialisation, and trying to find groups of people that they can get along with, live in the world, be creative and have some fun.